If you stand in the U.S. Congress in the year 2000 and listen to President Bill Clinton selling China's entry into the World Trade Organization, the confidence is overwhelming. He promises a safer, richer world if China is inside the system, not outside it. American companies will gain 1 billion new customers, and a China tied into global markets will inevitably become more open, more liberal, and more like the West. Fast forward 25 years, and the mood in Washington has flipped. The same political class that once cheered China's integration now warns of a China threat and calls the bet on engagement a historic mistake. So what happened? Did China simply trick America? Or did America build a ladder that China climbed and then panic when it saw how high China had gone? In the 1970s and 1980s, U.S. leaders of both parties embraced what we can call the Great Bet of Engagement. If China joined the U.S.-led order, trade rules, the dollar system, Western-dominated institutions, it would have a stake in preserving that order, and as Chinese incomes rose, a middle class would emerge that might demand Western-style rights. China's WTO entry in 2001 was sold as a classic win-win. America would get cheap goods and access to a huge new market. China would finally modernize under global rules. On the ground, that engagement looked like a very concrete deal, the factory bargain. America opened a consumer market, and Western firms shifted production to China, exporting manufacturing jobs and importing low inflation. China, in turn, offered low wages, disciplined labor, and a government ready to build roads, ports, and power plants almost overnight. In one Guangdong village, rice fields turned into electronics factories, and the young swapped farm work for assembly lines. In a Midwestern town, the same company closed its local plant, hollowing out the community. Globally, this was efficiency. Locally, it was upheaval. Studies later linked the China shock to several million lost U.S. manufacturing jobs. But during the boom years, very few complained. Corporate profits soared, and Walmart prices stayed low. At the same time, another engine of China's rise was running quietly: the Open University of America. From the 1980s onward, hundreds of thousands of Chinese students studied in U.S. universities, especially in science and engineering, learning not just advanced theory, but also how world-class labs and startups operate. Western firms eager to enter China set up joint ventures that shared technology and management know-how. U.S. venture capital funded Chinese internet and tech companies. American CEOs praised China as the factory of the world and increasingly as an R&D base too. The assumption was that knowledge was a one-way gift and that a richer China inside the system would still depend on U.S. technology and finance. Instead, China absorbed these lessons, massively ramped up its own research spending, and moved from imitation to innovation. By the late 2000s, the mood in Washington shifted into what we can call the panic phase. China had overtaken Japan as the world's second-largest economy, built the world's longest high-speed rail network, produced tech giants in e-commerce and digital payments, and launched ambitious projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. The 2008 financial crisis, which began on Wall Street, shattered American confidence, while China recovered quickly with a huge stimulus. The old story, engagement will change China, was replaced by a new one. Engagement empowered a rival. Huawei's rise in 5G, industrial plans like Made in China 2025, and China's assertiveness in the South China Sea were now seen as direct threats. Yet none of this came out of nowhere. It was a logical outcome of the very integration that Washington had championed. To understand why the panic is so emotional, you have to see who gained and who lost inside America. The engagement era produced what we can call dual prosperity, unequal pain. Global corporations, coastal tech and financial hubs, and highly educated professionals gained enormously from lower costs and access to China's market, while many industrial towns and blue-collar workers saw factories close, wages stagnate, and social problems deepen. In China, hundreds of millions were lifted out of absolute poverty, but inequality and housing costs soared, and pollution scarred the air and rivers. The benefits and costs of engagement were never evenly shared, and that unevenness now fuels politics. In the U.S., anger at offshoring feeds support for terrorist tech bans and a tougher line on China. In China, pride and national revival, makes people less willing to bow to Western pressure. The uncomfortable truth is that the United States did not accidentally help China rise. It made a deliberate strategic bet that integrating China into a U.S.-led system would lock in American primacy and gradually transform China's behavior. That bet succeeded in creating a rich, deeply interconnected China, but it failed in producing a smaller Western copy. Now both sides talk about decoupling and de-risking. Yet you cannot easily unwind supply chains that took 30 years to build or erase the knowledge that has already crossed borders. For the global South watching from the sidelines, the lesson is sharp. They saw the U.S. welcome China into the system, and now they see it panic when China competes at the top. The real question for the century is not just who wins the U.S.-China rivalry, but whether the two can accept that their fates are already entangled and learn to manage that interdependence without war. Because in the end, America didn't just watch China rise. It built the ladder, then woke up afraid of how high China had climbed.